You're listening to GOAZCATS.com today, a podcast all about your Arizona Wildcats. Featuring the latest news and analysis from the staff at GOAZCATS.com. Plus, interviews with players, coaches, and expert guests from across the Rivals.com network. Now, straight from the old Pueblo, Tucson, Arizona, here's the host of GOAZCATS.com today, Matt Moreno.
Wow, new intro, new title for the show. Maybe some more success for Arizona. Maybe that's the secret behind it. If Arizona, strings together some wins, maybe I'll take credit for it. But that's our new intro. We got someone to introduce me now, so you don't just have to hear me introducing you to the podcast. But welcome to GOAZCATS.com today. Obviously, Arizona, right on the cusp of opening its home slate for the 2019 season, hosting NAU Saturday night at 7:45 p.m. Means a late night for me. Hopefully all you guys are able to stay awake and watch what happens when Arizona takes on NAU Saturday night. But, a lot to get to. It feels like it's been forever since Arizona's played. They obviously had the loss to Hawaii to open the season, have kind of had to sit on that. Not a lot going on last week in terms of media availability. Kevin Sumlin didn't speak with the media. The players weren't permitted to speak with the media. But everything was kind of back to normal this week. We got, a Monday press conference. Tuesday, had a chance to spend some time with the players and get to talk to them a little bit more, just about what's going through their head, the mood of the team, their feeling about things. And it was generally pretty positive when you talk to different players about just kind of what's going on right now and kind of their mindset moving forward. A lot of them kind of echoed a lot of what Kevin Sumlin had to say in his Monday press conference. If you kind of turned off the voices and just kind of listened to the words, it sounded very, very similar. That could be good or bad, but there was a lot of talk about, again, remaining consistent, just doing things better and executing better. And a lot of the players put kind of what happened on the field on themselves, even though there was so much attention paid to the coordinators and so much criticism of the coaching staff after that loss to Hawaii. But the players are putting it on themselves. Jalen Harris was someone who put it on himself that Arizona didn't have more production from his defensive line and wasn't able to get as much of a pass rush as maybe we've heard about and seen kind of from this group over the course of this offseason. So it was interesting to kind of hear from them and get their take on things. Clearly there's been some things hammered home. Consistency is one of them. Getting a pass rush consistently is another one. The other thing that has really come up a lot this week has been not having a slow start. It's obviously something that Arizona's had trouble with going back to even last season and even other years under Rich Rodriguez. There was those moments where the team just couldn't get going right out of the gates and it put Arizona in a hole, and then they have to work their way back. This just isn't that type of team to be able to climb out of an early deficit. We saw that in the game against Hawaii. Arizona wasn't able to climb back. They kind of tied the game at moments, but weren't able to get over that final hump, and that's something that Stanley Berryhill, who actually had a pretty good game for Arizona, mentioned this week when I talked to him. He said, they had that slow start to start the game, came back, tied it up, kind of got the momentum going. Second half starts, they do the same thing again. They kind of have a slow start to start the second half, and it just put them in a hole the entire game, and they're kind of having to fight back, and it changes your game plan, it changes your mindset for how you want to approach things when that happens. And I still think the biggest thing that the biggest thing that I've seen, the biggest criticism, it has been just the way the team didn't look prepared. And that's something I noticed watching the game, and I think anybody who kind of pays attention to this team kind of noticed about this group. They just didn't look very prepared. And when you have Kevin Sumlin and the coaching staff talking about, that Hawaii was, and the players too, talking about Hawaii doing things that Arizona wasn't ready for. I mean, you have 9 months or whatever it is to kind of get ready for that game and be ready for anything. And I'm sure, obviously, Arizona's trying to work on everything that they've seen from Hawaii, but you always have to be ready for those things that you're not prepared for. And it's up to a coaching staff to adjust and be ready to go for those moments and have their players ready to go. And Arizona didn't look that way, and they've admitted that, there were some things that they weren't ready for, and it took them too long to adjust. And there were some bright moments in that first game of the season, but just too many negatives, and it led to that loss. And now Arizona comes into the second week of the season after this bye week and is looking to kind of rebound and start the home schedule with a win. Obviously, we're not going to learn a whole lot, I don't think, from this first game at Arizona Stadium. NAU, Arizona should beat them. The expectation is that they're going to beat them, and it's not even going to be close. There's a whole other side of this thing where if it is close, or if Arizona somehow loses this game, I mean, we're going to be talking about a whole lot of different things the next time we get together for this podcast. But with the expectation being that Arizona, is going to take care of NAU, if everything goes according to plan, we still really don't know a whole lot about this team because this is not even a good NAU team. They've had some good teams in the past and some strong teams, but there's just not a ton there with this group. They won their first game, but this really isn't going to tell you a whole lot. And obviously everyone who watched Texas Tech in the first week of the season saw what they can do offensively, and you looked at some of the things that they did using their slot receivers, throwing the ball around. And it's one of those situations where it looks a little bit scary for what could be coming for Arizona next Saturday. But you can't overlook NAU, and you have to kind of, you can only play who's in front of you. And for Arizona, that's going to be NAU this weekend. But there's not a whole lot, I think, unless Arizona, again, unless it goes really bad and there's a lot of negatives out of this game. I don't know that there's a whole lot we're going to learn about this team in the positive aspect. But we'll see what happens, and we'll have kind of full coverage of that, so make sure you're checking the site all weekend long, as we'll have breakdowns and interviews and all that from the game. I do want to get into this week's game, however, and there's going to be a lot to watch. I mean, everyone's going to have their eye, I think, on a lot of different things. I think it depends on who's going to be watching the game, what you're going to be focused on, but one thing I want to try and do every week for these game day kind of / pre-game day podcasts is to talk about, the 5 players that I think are going to be most important to Saturday's game, and 5 guys that I'm going to be having my eye on and, have my eye out for and watching throughout, Saturday night or whenever the game time is. I doubt there's going to be any daytime games anytime soon. But for this Saturday night, I have 5 guys that I picked out that I think are just going to be important to what Arizona wants to do Saturday night to earn a win, obviously, but to kind of just grow and get ready for, I think, the big test that everyone sees next week with Texas Tech. First on my list is someone I probably should have had higher on the list last week. I put him on my list, thankfully, but Jace Whitaker, I think, was just so impressive in what he did against Hawaii. I keep saying last week, I know, 2 weeks ago. But Jace Whitaker was so impressive with what he did against Hawaii. Really looked like the best player on the field. He received a huge high grade from Pro Football Focus, which grades out everybody and watches all the games a bunch of times, has different people evaluate, and Jace Whitaker got one of the best grades I think I've seen since I've had access to that service, and from an Arizona player at least. And he just looked like the best player on the field, and Arizona is trying to figure out ways to use him more and get him more involved in other areas to help. As we all saw, the middle of the field, Arizona had issues in that secondary with its safety group covering the middle of the field and the linebacker group. Colin Schooler didn't have his greatest day in coverage in that game. But Jace Whitaker, I mean, if he can continue to play like that the rest of the season, he's going to be, one of those guys that's talked about as one of the better DBs in the conference, and is going to give himself a great chance to, have a professional career. I mean, that was one of those types of performances against Hawaii with 5 tackles, 2 interceptions, a pass breakup. He goes on Cedric Byrd in the second half and starts covering him in the slot and essentially shuts him down. Nobody else could do that on Arizona's defense, and Jace Whitaker locked him up and really shut him down, and that's to his credit. I mean, that's a huge deal, and helped Arizona in that situation, and gave the team and the coaching staff some insight into how they could maybe use him moving forward. Obviously, that's his first game coming off some injuries last year, and to have that type of performance is big for him. He means so much to this defense with his ability to just lead the team and understand the game. I think a lot better than maybe anybody else on that defense. He really thinks the game through, and he passes on that knowledge. He talks to the other guys. He talks to different position groups, and talks about what to expect. And that's one reason that Kevin Sumlin said he kept him around last year when he was injured and let him be on the sidelines and let him go on road trips, even though they knew he wasn't going to play, was because he had that insight and could get on the same level as these players and understand what they're thinking, maybe different than even what a coach thinks, even though the coaches are, there with him every day. So he's such a huge part of this defense, and he's going to be key in this game. They're going to use him on the slot a little bit more, I think, and get him in some different positions, which could be good or bad for depending on how his replacements at that cornerback spot play. But he proved to be a valuable tool for this defense, and if he can continue to play that well and does it again this week, I think Arizona has something there, and it'll maybe be the key to trying to turn this defense around and getting them going in the right direction. Number 2 on my list this week is J.J. Taylor, someone who didn't have his best performance last week. And really, that's nothing to do with him. I mean, he just didn't get the ball very much. He had 14 carries, had a reception, had 67 yards and a touchdown against Hawaii, but just did not have the type of showing that I think everybody expected from the guy who leads the league in all-purpose yards. He had a kind of his own little misstep there with one of the kickoffs went right through his hands, and it wasn't in danger of being a terrible situation, but definitely one of those times where just kind of a head scratcher coming from someone like that. But overall, he did well, especially in the second half when he was able to kind of get going and they're able to wear down the Hawaii defense a little bit more. But J.J. Taylor is just someone who needs to get the ball more, and I think he's going to be an important part of this game. Again, looking ahead to not only next week, but the upcoming games that Arizona's going to have. If they want to be in any of these games, they're going to have to run the ball. It's going to be too much to just put it on Khalil Tate and his arm and this receiving core that didn't necessarily step up to the plate like we thought in the first game of the season. So you can't make this team one-dimensional, and if you are going to make them one-dimensional, you kind of want them to lean on their best group. Their running back group is their best group right now, and has the most depth, and they can play 5 guys there and have no issues, not have a ton of drop-off between the first guy on the depth chart and the 5th guy. So moving forward, it's going to be interesting to see how Arizona plans to use him. I know there were some issues with what Hawaii ended up showing defensively. They ended up bringing a lot of guys in the box and taking away that running game from Arizona, which is what you want to do. I think a lot of teams are going to do that against Arizona, but you still have to be able to run the ball, get the ball to J.J. Taylor, and if not, maybe get someone else involved. Maybe get a guy like Gary Brightwell some touches, and Nathan Tilford some touches, some guys that have some better size, have more height, can kind of take that the plays that go up the middle and kind of go through the game that way. But whatever happens, J.J. Taylor needs to have the ball in his hands more. I was saying out before the season that I was hopeful that the staff would use him more as a receiver, and it ended up being Michael Wiley who ends up being that guy in the first game who gets the ball as a receiver, and he did well. I think this group has that about it. They're very capable of being receivers and catching passes, and I think J.J. Taylor is one of those guys that if you got him in space, it'd be really dangerous and he'd be hard to stop. So we'll see what happens and how many more touches he gets. I think Kevin Sumlin has heard the criticism. He mentioned that he doesn't want J.J. Taylor to be a guy that carries the ball 30 times on his own. That's what he wants the group to be, I think, closer to 30, 35 maybe for the entire group. But I do think that you're going to see J.J. Taylor have the ball in his hands some more in this game, and they're going to make a point to kind of make sure that they can run the ball, and that's something they can still do. But he's definitely going to be an important player in Saturday's game and beyond. Number 3 on my list is going to be the quarterback, Khalil Tate. I mean, it's just hard to make any of these lists and not list him every game. Just get used to that. I'm sure he'll be on this list pretty much every game, but maybe I'll have to exempt him. It'll be everyone else, the top 5 important players outside of Khalil Tate, because we all know how important he is to this team and to the offense, and he showed last week that he's capable of being someone who can still run the ball, and I think that's going to be an important part that he needs to develop. I thought that last run, and maybe I'm making too much of this, I brought it up in different stories and different outlets, but that last play I thought was the closest we've seen to 2017 October Khalil Tate. He didn't get in the end zone, obviously. He got caught from behind on a great play from the defensive tackle, who ended up running him down and making that play right at the 1-yard line. But I just think that that play to me really signified, okay, there's still some of that inside of him, and he's still capable of being that type of player where he gets out on the run and makes things happen. And maybe that's not the play call, and sometimes coaches get bothered by that, but he's able to freelance a little bit, improvise, and make something out of nothing, and Arizona needed that play at that time, and almost pulled it off. But to me, I think the positive sign would be to see more of that from him running the ball a little bit more. If he can have 100 rushing yards again, even if he can push that and get closer to 150, and really hammer home the point that he's willing to run again, and he's not going to be that guy that he was last year where he was a little bit hesitant. There was still some of that in the first half of the Hawaii game, I thought. You could tell that he's really focusing on his safety and not getting hurt and remaining upright and being able to continue to lead this team. But I think that last play to me is the one that stands out as something that looked different and looked closer to being that guy that we grew to know back in the 2017 season when he really, set college football on fire with his ability to make plays and strike big when it mattered most. And so I think Arizona could really use that from him the rest of the season. It could be kind of the only hope for this team if this defense doesn't improve some as the season moves along, because that could be the only thing that really turns things in favor of Arizona, is having a player like 2017 Khalil Tate, because there were a lot of question marks and coming into this season, and I don't know that many of them got answered, and if they did, the answer wasn't very good based on the Hawaii game. So we'll have to see how it all goes moving forward. But to me, he's one of the top players to watch out for, and obviously in Saturday's game, but an important part of what they're going to do again, not only Saturday night, but moving forward as well. Number 4 on my list is a pass rusher, but it's not the one we've been talking about a lot, and not the one we're going to have an interview with a little bit later in the podcast. But Jalen Harris will be important, but J.B. Brown, I think, is someone who needs to take his game to another level. And he had the only quarterback hurry in the game against Hawaii, but we've seen so much of what he's done, and even in training camp, he was on a different level during some of those times when the media was able to watch the live periods in practice. I mean, there was a moment in one of the practices where he blew by an offensive guard who was pulling. He beat the guard down the line to make the play and get the running back in the backfield. And it's things like that you want to see on the field, and that he's shown during practice that need to translate and need to start translating a little bit more into production on the field for Arizona, because we all know he has it in him. He just has to start doing it on the field a little bit more. He's someone that the coaching staff really loves, and they've talked about him growing and maturing as a player and really becoming a good leader for this defensive line group and the defense in general. But he had 3 tackles last week, which is not bad. And again, he had that quarterback hurry. But I think for Arizona to be the defense that it thinks it can be, and will have to be moving forward for Arizona to have a chance to win games, J.B. Brown's going to have to be a big part of that, along with Jalen Harris and some of these other guys on the defensive line. That pass rush is something that's been talked about a lot this week, and there's no magic to turning that around. Obviously, Arizona has some good depth, and maybe you'll see some different faces in there this week. But J.B. Brown is someone that has the talent and has the ability to do it and get the job done, and it needs to start happening for Arizona, because he could be such a key piece of what they do on that side of the ball. And there's been so much talk, like I mentioned, that you want to see that turn into production. And he didn't have a bad first game, but I think moving forward they need him to be better and carry more of the weight than probably anticipated, and probably what he thought he would be doing coming into the season. And I know when you get a chance to talk to him, it's important to him, and he wants to be good. He obviously has a brother in the NFL, and I think that's his dream as well, and he wants to be at that level. And as this pass rush gets better, he's going to be a big part of it, and I think he's going to be someone to really watch this week, because it's going to be important to get to the quarterback when they play Texas Tech and some of these other teams that are coming up on the schedule. Number 5 on my list is one of the most important players on the team, regardless of my list or not. But number 5 for us is going to be Colin Schooler. He led the team in tackles. He had 9 tackles, half a sack, half a tackle for loss, and a fumble recovery in the game against Hawaii. And it's crazy to say that that's just not enough. But that's not enough. Arizona needs him to be a superstar. And, he didn't have the best game, especially in coverage. There were a lot of issues, and not that he was the only one, but Arizona had issues all over the place in the middle of the field against Hawaii. And as Kevin Sumlin said earlier this week, that kind of set up the blueprint for other teams and how other teams are going to start approaching Arizona or continuing to approach Arizona. And that the middle of the field is something I feel like, since I've been covering this team, it's been a topic we've talked about over and over again. The middle of the field, whether it's tight ends or whoever, slot receivers, just teams understand that they can work the middle of the field against Arizona, and it's something that Arizona needs to get figured out, because if not, we saw what the result is against a team like Hawaii, who might not be that great, was picked in the middle of its conference, and you just need to be better. And I think for Colin Schooler, it's going to be a chance at some redemption, showing people that he isn't that type of guy that everyone saw last week. He got put in some tough spots, and it's not his fault that he doesn't have kind of the skill set to play in some of those situations. But, when you're trying to play at the next level and be one of the best players in the conference, those little things matter. And being able to cover and do everything that comes with the job of being a middle linebacker, teams are going to be looking for that at the next level. And it's going to be his opportunity this year to really kind of shine and make sure that he shows everything he can in case he does want to try and leave early. That performance against Hawaii, I don't know that that's the tape that you'll want to put on, but I think for him, I think what you know about Colin Schooler is that he's someone who will bounce back and will make sure that he puts in the effort and the work to have a better game. When you do get the chance to kind of say, hey, he was responsible for what went wrong, I mean, that's a very rare occasion. So I think those moments are built for Colin Schooler for, bouncing back and being able to have a better game. And I think he's going to be – it's less about this single game to me with Colin Schooler and why I'll be watching him on Saturday night, but more about moving forward. And if he can have a real turnaround Saturday night, be a star like we all know he can be, I think it's going to be very good for Arizona moving forward. And obviously the tougher tests are coming up on the schedule, but I think it'll be a good sign if he can kind of have a great showing against NAU. As I said earlier, the players were made available this week, and now as we kind of move on to the next part of the podcast, every week I either want to talk to someone who's from the other side that can give us a glimpse into Arizona's opponent, or at the very least kind of have an interview so you guys don't have to just listen to me every week. But last week we talked to Jamari Joyner, had him kind of give some insight. Again, I keep saying last game. Talked to Jamari Joyner about his debut at receiver on offense. This week I thought the interview that stood out when talking with the players was Jalen Harris, and he took a lot of the responsibility, like I mentioned earlier, for what went wrong with the defensive line, for the lack of pressure on the quarterback, and I think he's going to take it on himself to really be the guy who turns it around. I think he wants to be in that position, and so I took some time to talk with him just about a lot of different things, and he was pretty honest, and as someone mentioned on the message boards, I believe, he did sound like Kevin Sumlin in some instances, but I think overall, he made some comments that I think stand out and I think are worth sharing. And so here's a little bit of that interview with Jalen Harris talking about kind of what went wrong, what the team has been focused on, especially over the last couple weeks here that they've been getting ready for this NAU game and coming off the Hawaii loss, just to kind of give some insight into kind of the team's frame of mind at this point, heading into an important part of the schedule. What's kind of been the message just from the coaching staff over this last couple weeks since the Hawaii game?
I think it's that we need to take it slow and just do your job. Don't try to do too much. Just do what you're supposed to do.
In terms of what Coach mentioned yesterday when he was talking to us, he mentioned pass rush a lot. How much is that something you have to take responsibility for, and how much is it something the rest of the group has to do as well?
Yeah, I take responsibility for myself not doing as good. Also, my teammates. I think it's something we need to focus on and work harder at. I expected more out of myself, and I didn't do a good job in the game, so I take big responsibility for the result.
Was Coach Yoner disappointed at all with kind of what you guys did, or did he have certain critiques about what you guys were able to do in that game?
Yeah, he was. He was disappointed in us because it didn't matter if we rushed 3 or 4. We still should be able to get pressure, so that's something we take pride in, so we have to be better.
What's kind of the mindset and approach this week playing a team like NAU?
We just been practicing hard, fixing our mistakes, and a good team is coming in here this weekend. We have to take care of business and show up.
Did you like having the week off last week, or does it help or hurt you guys in any way coming off a game like you did?
I was kind of frustrated. I want to get right back to it after the tough loss, but the week helped because now we got more time to study NAU, and we should be more prepared.
What's the key to kind of changing, I guess, the mindset about how you guys approach the rest of the season? Obviously, going to that game, everyone kind of expects you to win that game. You don't get the win. Do you guys have to change your mindset, or what? How do you guys approach it kind of that way?
I would say just make sure we're practicing hard. Everybody needs to hold each other accountable.
In terms of the week leading up to that, was there anything different that you sensed, or did it feel like there was something you could pick that this might not go our way, or what kind of was the mindset going into that game?
We thought we were ready. It showed in the game we were not, so we just had to come out the week after, practice hard to fix everything and get it right.
What's been the message from Coach Yates this week, this last couple weeks?
We just need to be a physical football team, fly around, and we need to take the ball away and get off the field early. That's what we didn't do. We allowed Hawaii to be on the field for a long time.
I know it's hard to kind of stay off social media and stuff like that, but when you guys lose a game like that, there's going to be this negativity from around. How do you deal with the person? How do you think the team kind of tries to deal with that, especially when you maybe hear it on campus and things like that?
People are gonna say things. You can't respond. Like when you're doing good, you're gonna hear good things. When you're doing bad, you're hearing bad things. It's just what comes with it.
How has it been in those situations with Coach Sumlin? Obviously, he's only a year into this thing. When you guys have moments like that, is he someone that says, "Hey, stay off of kind of things like that," or what's kind of his message dealing with that?
He'll tell us we're gonna see things, but we gotta not say anything. Don't respond. It's just you gotta be a man about it and handle it.
Was there any kind of, I know it's maybe early in the season to kind of have these private meetings, or maybe it's even with just close friend groups on the team, where you guys kind of sat down and said, hey, this is what we need to do, or maybe leadership within the team kind of said, hey, this is what we need to do, guys, to kind of get back on track? Was there any of that going on the last couple weeks?
Yeah, we had a big talk and said we need to come out harder and practice hard because what we were doing before wasn't enough. So we got to change that, change how we practice and our mindset.
In terms of just kind of moving forward, what's the focus and mindset for you guys going into this game and then the rest of the season?
Just be a physical team, man. We need to be a high energy team. We can't depend on other people to give us our energy, like the fans and stuff. We got to support each other and be confident in ourselves.
So you studied the tape. What are some things NAU does well?
They run the ball really good. They're a physical team, and so we can't underestimate them at all.
So as you heard from Jalen Harris there, not a lot of finger pointing going on right now. I think the players understand that, they're going to be the ones that turn this thing around. The coaches can only do so much, and you can only do so much with what the coaches are giving you. And obviously you want to run the right play and make sure that you're executing what they're sending out there. But the players are going to be the one who turns this thing around and gets the defense going in the right direction. I think for someone like Jalen Harris, he takes that, on himself and wants to be the person who's responsible for turning it around and bringing some positivity to the group, because I think it is hard on these players to, have to deal with the negativity. And I talked to someone about that last week, I think, just about, these guys, social media is right there and they're going to hear it from fans on social media and understand that that's just part of what comes with it. But then they have the other part of going to class and there's, their peers and other students who, tell them, hey, I can't believe you lost to Hawaii. How could you lose to them? And you guys look this way. And so, it's tough to, I think, be in that position. But Jalen Harris had a lot of, I thought, insightful things to say about the group on defense and what they're doing right now. And we'll see what happens as they kind of move forward. But he definitely is in a position where he needs to produce more as well, kind of like I mentioned J.B. Brown in that last segment. And I think those two guys in particular are going to be important to getting this pass rush going and having it be what we thought it could heading into the season, when they showed, in the spring game and during training camp that it was becoming a strength of the team. And that just didn't show up against Hawaii, and that's going to need to change, because Arizona needs those guys to have some kind of positive impact on defense, and we'll see what it all means. But like I said, the games coming up are not going to be easy ones, especially as you get over these next kind of couple games, and we'll see what happens from there. But I thought Jalen Harris, has the right frame of mind, and we'll see what that leads to once they get on the field Saturday night. Now it's our turn to hear from you guys. As I mentioned before, there's a number to call in. If you're a premium subscriber to GOAZCATS.com, you have that number. It's on the message boards. And you can call in and sound off, give your thoughts on the team, on a game, whatever's on your mind about, Arizona football or basketball as we kind of move into that season soon. But Axe Advisor, again, comes in with a good question, asking about coordinators, letting me be Dave Hickey for a moment. He has a question about just how I would approach things if I was, in charge and the guy making the calls in terms of the coaching staff and how I want this football program to go. So I'll let you guys hear that question, and then I'll come back with an answer.
Hey, Matt, Axe Advisor here. Question this week regarding our coordinators. You've mentioned that Kevin Sumlin is pretty much hands-off as it relates to his interaction with those two guys. When we look at ASU, when they hired their coach, they put him in as almost like Herm Edwards as a figurehead and brought strong coordinators to each side of the ball. And the thought was that that's where they would spend their money. As you look at Kevin Sumlin and his areas of maybe expertise and where he's the strongest, what type of formula would you use if you were the athletic director and you were going to make some recommendations to him as how to integrate, the coordinators and make them stronger. Thanks.
So as you guys heard, Axe Advisor wants me to essentially give my thoughts on what I think and what I would do if I was in the position to kind of make the calls and be the one in charge of figuring this thing out for Arizona football when it comes to the coordinators. You brought up ASU and that whole situation, and obviously it made waves and kind of brought a lot of chuckles, for myself included, when they brought up that theory and that idea of, making Herm Edwards the CEO type of the program and kind of just being the person at the top, not necessarily making all the decisions and delegating a lot of that power to the assistant coaches and the coordinators, which the way they approached it and the way they talked about it, that's what brought the laughs. But when you took a step back and looked at what they were doing, it's what a lot of programs do. They just don't frame it in the way that ASU did. And so it's not that different. It's not that strange. It's not that groundbreaking. It's just a different way of talking about something that goes on a lot. Arizona is kind of in a similar position. I don't think that it's as drastic as that situation up there in Tempe, but I do think, and we know this, that, and the coaches have talked about it since they really arrived, that one thing Kevin Sumlin does is he kind of lets them do their jobs, and I think it's opposite of what you had before with the previous coaching staff. I think Rich Rodriguez wanted his hands kind of in a little bit of everything and really wanted to make sure that especially on offense, that the final say was what he had to say, and as a head coach you have that right. And I know there was coaches on the staff who wanted to maybe do a little bit more and have a little bit bigger say in kind of what happened on the field, but you have to fall into line and with a coach like that and really do your job, and as much as that entails. And for this coaching staff, I think they've really appreciated having someone who isn't that way and just kind of lets them do what they do. There are positives and negatives to that. We've seen some of the negatives, with some of the play calling and some of the decisions, and I think everybody would want a job where they can make those mistakes and not have their boss breathing down their neck. So that's, I think there is some good to it. I think when it's going well, they're like anything else, the issue doesn't come up as much, but I do think I don't mind the ASU model. I think that can work at a lot of places. I think for this coaching staff, it certainly would be an okay way to go about it. If I was in charge again, I to your point, I think I would make sure that there's some strong hires at the coordinator positions. On defense, to me, it's an interesting position to be in as a coach, because you're not going to get the high-end talent that you might get at other schools, but there is still a lot of guys that you can get that will be solid players, and you can have NFL caliber type players, especially as I mentioned before on other outlets and articles and things like that, where the skill guys, especially out west, like you can find those guys a lot of places, and they're still you can go down the list and find a recruit who's maybe a 3-star guy, but isn't that far removed from one of the guys that's at the top of the list. A 4-star guy, 5-star guys are always going to be different, but I think you can find talent, especially out west, at those positions. So it's not always going to. You can build a roster with recruits from where Arizona needs to recruit from it and still have a lot of success as a defensive coach. But I think one thing that happens is you try and get too, I don't know if cute's the right word, but just try and get too creative almost, where you have these different looks and these different schemes, where I think I would probably focus more on somebody who just runs, a regular scheme. And I know there's multiple and there's different looks, there's different fronts, different things that teams can do. But and Arizona does a lot of that. I think they change the front, they change the look, they move a lot of guys around. And again, it's a talent situation when it comes down to the end of it. But for me, I think especially on defense, I would probably lean towards running something more traditional, and making it a little bit easier on guys to, understand where they're supposed to be, make the job straightforward. And that's kind of what happened with this season, going to that 4-down lineman front. I think it made the job a lot easier on guys. They know what their job is, they know what their task is, and especially for those, pass rushers, it's go get the quarterback. That's their job, for the most part. And I think at this level, you need to kind of do that in a lot of ways, and that would kind of be one of my priorities if I was making the decisions. Offensively, I think it's the same thing. You don't want to make it too complicated. You want to make it simple and straightforward, and I think that's the way that would bring some success. But I don't there's not one easy fix. There's so much that goes into it, into hiring coordinators, figuring out, one, if they can recruit. They have to be active, and at a place like Arizona, it's so unique, just in location and stature within the college football world. So recruiting is a big part of it, but you also have to be able to teach and have a system and a style that, can be taught. And I think right now, with kind of the roster that's been built, I think keeping things simple is the answer to, making it a little bit easier on everybody. But I think it's definitely important to have those for a coach like Kevin Sumlin to have strong coordinators, and I think that's why he leaned on, someone like Noel Mazzoni, who has so many years of experience. And there's people who will say different things about, his style and how that rubs people the wrong way. And, he's been at a lot of different spots and hasn't, necessarily stuck around for a long time at one single destination. So I understand those gripes. I understand, where people are coming from on that. But I think for Kevin Sumlin, I think he sees the experience in the years that, Noel Mazzoni has been able to be a coach, and that doesn't happen by accident. If you're not good, you can't just keep getting jobs. So there's something that, all these programs are seeing, all these teams are seeing, that they like about what he does. And then with Marcel Yates, obviously that was a little bit different situation because, the players were, pulling for him. They wanted to keep him. They wanted him in the mix, and they got their wish, and he's been able to stick around and continue to build his defense and try and get it going in the right direction. But I do think that, moving forward, whatever happens this season, or whenever, if this is a hypothetical world, I do think that, with Kevin Sumlin there, strong coordinators at any program, but having strong coordinators is definitely the way to go. But it's a multi-layered type of situation, and in the end, you need a lot of money to get the right guys. And Arizona is not one of those programs right now that is pulling the money like other programs are. So there's tough decisions that have to be made, but we'll just kind of have to see how the season plays out. And it's never nice or easy to talk about the futures of coaches. So that's kind of all I'll say about that one. But let's move on to the next part of this. So now we'll go to a couple of questions from the message boards that I wanted to pull out that I thought were pretty interesting and could be some good topics of discussion. First, we're going to go to Dan the Catman on our message boards. He says, I'm a staunch U of A fan and not so expert armchair coach. Our linebackers have great potential and have done great in stretches, but how'd they grade out in game one? From a novice view, they seem to have trouble in coverage. Any expert opinion here? Thanks, Dan, for the question. The linebackers, it was interesting I wrote about it this week as well. Colin Schooler, to have kind of the rare game where you could point to him and say, man, he was kind of part of the issue with their defense in that game. And yes, he led the team in tackles, he led the team in a lot of categories in that game, and it's unfortunate to have to say that, he needs to play better, but he needs to play better. Arizona needs its guys who are, the star players on its team to step up, and Colin Schooler got put in some tough positions that, he's just never going to thrive in, and that's just tough. I mean, that was just the situation, and the coaches have to do a better job of making sure he doesn't get in tough situations where he's having to cover down the field, because that isn't his strength. And he was one of those guys that got beat over the middle of the field. But the entire linebacker group didn't grade out very well. Tony Fields was probably the best of that group. He had his interception, and he did a good job in coverage for the most part. And when he had to kind of, drop back and not get after the quarterback, he was able to do that. But Anthony Pandy actually had the stats, but didn't necessarily grade out very well. And I'm just going off the Pro Football Focus grades and kind of using that as kind of the basis of kind of coming up with what I'm talking about. But Pro Football Focus had Anthony Pandy actually had two linebackers as the worst overall grades in the game against Hawaii. Anthony Pandy had a 47 overall, which was the second lowest, and then Day Coleman had the lowest. He only played 3 plays, but he had a 43.8. You compare that to Jace Whitaker, who I mentioned was outstanding, and he had a 91 overall. So Colin Schooler was another one. He was in the bottom, very kind of bottom of that list. I mean, of the people who played the most, Jalen Harris, J.B. Brown, Colin Schooler, Scotty Young Jr., and Anthony Pandy are near the bottom of that list. You need those guys to move up. You can't have that group playing that way and producing like that, and coming back with returns like that on their grades. Overall, I thought the linebacker group wasn't terrible, but there was a long way to go, and it didn't look like the strength of the defense like we know it has been. But yeah, I think you're spot on there with your thoughts. I think in coverage it was tough. I mean, it was tough for everybody. I think in that kind of middle of the field, the safeties had issues. We've already mentioned Scotty Young and his problems that he had in coverage, but I think right after Scotty Young, you had to look at Colin Schooler and say he got put in some bad spots and couldn't deliver when it came to coverage. So it's something that the coaching staff's going to have to fix. They're going to have to be better. Everyone, I think, across the board on the defense is going to have to be better, especially once they get into this next part of the schedule after NAU and kind of starting with Texas Tech, and we'll see what happens with UCLA and Colorado. But it's that group has to be better. I mean, and I think the coaching staff will figure out some ways to not put Colin Schooler in those types of positions where it's going to put him in a tough spot where he's going to have to do things that just don't come as naturally to him. But yeah, I think it wasn't terrible, but I think for what they've done before, I think it was a little bit disappointing to see how they performed. Like I said, they still have the stats. I mean, if you look at their tackles list, Colin Schooler's at the top, Anthony Pandy's third, Tony Fields is up there with 5 tackles. So it wasn't like they weren't producing. It was just the moments that were bad were pretty bad, and I think that's something that has to get corrected as they move forward now. Another defense question, because, why not? We know that's what we've all been kind of talking about and focused on the last couple weeks, but this is from WK Summon. I wish you would call in one time so I can figure out exactly how to say her name. But here's the question. It's will it be acceptable to give up more than 20 points as a defense in this game against NAU? Well, I think the answer is yes, but probably just barely. I have it about 25 points right now. I think if Arizona is going to give up more than 25 points, there's going to be a lot more questions being asked about, the future of some people on staff maybe, and just the overall progress of the defense, because if any you can get into that 30 range, it's tough. I mean, you shouldn't be giving up that many points to this NAU team, and coming off the performance against Hawaii where there were so many disappointed people, and you're supposed to win that game by double digits, and you end up losing, giving up 600 yards. I think there's just it's a tough spot to be in, and I think for Arizona, you want to prove that you're not that team that everybody saw against Hawaii, and that you are able to build off this. You remember we've talked about different things, and this topic has been brought up a lot. They had 9 months to prepare for the Hawaii game, and they looked unprepared. You now have a couple weeks to get ready for NAU, another opponent that you should beat. If you can't do it again, I mean, that just sends another bad message about this team. And as I've talked about before on this podcast, when you get down to it, they're not going to fire players. They're going to fire coaches if they ever get to that point. And ultimately, the coaches are the ones who have to answer for what's going on the field. And if Arizona has back-to-back bad games against teams it should be beating, and not even really having a big issue with, that's a problem, and Arizona's going to have to get it figured out. So this is a real interesting game just from that standpoint, because I was on a radio show this week, and one of the things that was talked about was just that. I mean, it really is not a no-win situation for Arizona in a lot of ways. If they win, and even if they win big, that's just what they're supposed to do. So there's not going to be much excitement or fanfare about that. The players will feel good, coaches will feel better about the team, but fans aren't going to, be throwing a parade for a win over NAU. If it's a close game, that's a bad message. If Arizona somehow loses to NAU, I mean, that's one of the worst things that could happen right now at this point in the season and this point in the program and where it's trying to go. It just can't happen. And so I do think this defense is going to continue to have to work and is going to have its struggles. It just feels that way right now. And so I put it a little bit higher. I think you can, give up 25 points and still feel okay. But if you get around that 30 range or 35 or, where you're really struggling, I think that sends a terrible message and kind of lets you know what this defense is about. And as much as maybe we thought it was going to be improved, maybe it just won't be. But, I think that's where I'd set the bar. Anything less than that, I think anything more than, 25, like I said, I think would be inexcusable, and that's coming off a game that was already kind of inexcusable when Arizona had no reason to not be prepared for that game against Hawaii and not have that showing that it did, but it still went out there and did it. So that's kind of where I would put the bar, but yeah, it's definitely going to be something that I'll have my eye on, and I'm sure a lot of people watching will be paying close attention to that defense and seeing how it comes out and what it looks like Saturday night. All right, well, thank you guys for all those questions. I'll have the mailbag as well with some more questions from our subscribers on game day. But next, we're going to kind of just wrap up here and look ahead to Saturday night's game. Right now, I'll just give you my score prediction up front. I have it at 55-24, Arizona wins. I do think the offense gets on track, doesn't have that slow start. Been wrong before, though. But, yeah, I think Arizona figures things out a little bit more on offense. And NAU, if this was a different NAU team, I might be a little bit more hesitant on that. But this NAU team is just not very good, which is why a loss or a close game would just be pretty devastating to kind of the progress that the program is trying to make. And there'd be a lot more talk about if that does happen, if they end up losing, or if it's even a close game. So. But I think Arizona wins this one well, just moves on and then gets ready for Texas Tech. As we mentioned in the last little question there, it was brought up 20 points is, would that be acceptable to give up, more than 20 points? Like I said, I had it at 25, so 55-24 is kind of right in that range. I do think NAU is going to be able to do something on offense. Case Cookis is the quarterback. He's been around for, I think, roughly 17 years. No, he's a senior now, but it feels like he's been around for a lot longer than 4 years. But yeah, I think their offense is good enough to score some points and do a little bit of damage, and then it's more about Arizona's defense at that point as well, because we've kind of seen what happens with them and an offense that can kind of throw the ball around. But I think this is the game for Arizona to get back on track. You get it out of the way, you play it, you win, you go home happy. You have some positivity next week, and you get ready for Texas Tech, which is the real crucial game of this season. It is gonna tell us a lot about where Arizona goes from here, whether this season becomes one that starts to turn into a bit of a tailspin, or they can build off of it and head into Pac-12 play with a winning record and a positive mindset. But there's definitely going to be a lot to watch out for in this game. It's intriguing just from that standpoint. There's a lot of things on Arizona's side that we really need to see some more of that we just didn't get to see against Hawaii, and I think that's going to be an important part of understanding what this team is about as they move forward through the season, because you don't want to go into, and their Pac-12 schedule to open is not extremely tough, but you don't want to go into that feeling down on yourself when you've already had some struggles early in the season. And if two of those teams that you're struggling against are Hawaii, and Hawaii could be great, as I mentioned earlier, could be a great team. We'll see once they play Oregon State, but not that tells us very much either. But I do think that Arizona wants to set itself up for next week and that game that's going to really could be a turning point for this season and get them going on the right path. So going to be a lot to watch out for. I appreciate you guys listening, and as always, make sure to send me your questions whenever I post about it. Call into the call-in number if you want to be heard or ask me a question. But until then, make sure to check out our coverage of Saturday's game. We're going to have plenty of it from Arizona Stadium. And thanks again for listening.
GOAZCATS.com. He's the totally unofficial U of A fan site and your source for University of Arizona team coverage and recruiting news.